One of the things that fascinates me the most about the natural world are the mathematical patterns that are ingrained into it. For example, just look at how the Fibonacci sequence, which is a series of numbers in which each number is the sum of the two preceding ones, exists in anywhere from flowers to shell growth to the shape of galaxies, or how symmetry exists in anywhere from flowers to viruses. It's really quite amazing how stuff that emerges without any artificial human hands comes to form such seemingly perfect mathematical patterns. Now the question is, does it apply to human organisms too? Specifically to the economy? Are free market economies that are guided by private enterprise, competition, and unhindered price mechanisms more efficient than command economies being guided by politicians and bureaucrats? In this video, we're going to talk about two economists that certainly made a case for that.
Hey guys, before we start the video, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel and share it to your friends. That would be very helpful for me.
The economic philosophy of Friedrich Hayek can be summarized by one quote. The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design. Friedrich Hayek was born on May 8, 1899, in Vienna, Austria. Growing up, Hayek showed an early interest in social sciences, and he would spend many hours reading books on history, philosophy, and economics. In 1917, at the age of 18, Hayek was conscripted into the Austro-Hungarian army during World War I, seeing actions on the Italian front. The war had a profound impact on Hayek, and he later wrote that it was his experience during this time that led him to become an economist. After the war, Hayek enrolled into the University of Vienna to study law and economics. There he was taught by some of the leading thinkers of his time, including Ludwig von Mises. Mises was a libertarian economist who became a mentor and a lifelong friend of Friedrich Hayek. Mises exposed Hayek to issues related to socialism and central planning. Mises was a strong opponent of socialism and argued that central planning was inherently flawed. Because of that, Friedrich Hayek developed strong free market views, which he advocated for throughout the rest of his lifetime. The most famous argument Friedrich Hayek made in regards to that is related to information and prices. You see, in a free market, prices are determined by supply and demand, meaning that whenever there is a shortage of something, its price goes up, and whenever there is enough of something to satisfy the demand of the population, its price goes down. This naturally incentivizes producers to move on to produce more of the stuff that is at shortage, instead of stuff that there is already enough supply of, making the economy more balanced. You can sort of think of price mechanisms like the glue of the economy. On the contrary, however, in a centrally planned economy, like that of the Soviet Union, this mechanism of prices just doesn't exist, and bureaucrats sort of have to guess everything. The problem is that there are billions of transactions going on in the economy, and the bureaucrat, however intelligent may he be, can't really comprehend that. That's why in the Soviet economy, there were often shortages of basic products, like food and clothing, and in some cases, oversupply of stuff like steel, leading to a waste of resources and damage to the environment. To cover these shortages and inefficiencies, black markets made out of stuff such as vodka bottles instead of typical money were created. Friedrich Hayek believed that nearly all government central planning and engineering of the economy was inherently distorting and damaging. This view didn't end with fiscal policy, which is stuff such as government spending, taxation, and regulation of the economy, but also monetary policy, which refers to everything having to do with money in itself, like how much money to print or interest rates. In his 1976 book, The Denationalization of Money, Friedrich Hayek argued for a complete privatization of currency. Hayek envisioned a world in which central banks are abolished, and the government control over the production of currency will end, and multiple currencies would circulate, each with its own market-determined exchange rate. People would be free to choose which currency they wanted to hold, and used in their daily transactions, and banks and other financial institutions would be able to issue their own currencies, subject to market demand and competition.
During his early days, Friedrich Hayek was primarily a technical economist. However, by the 1940s, following the rise of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union and the Second World War, Friedrich Hayek started to broaden his philosophy and writing.
In 1944, he published his most famous work, The War to Serfdom. In this book, Friedrich Hayek argued that central planning and government control over the economy would inevitably lead to authoritarianism and the loss of individual freedom. He argued that the centralization of economic decision-making in the hand of government bureaucrats would inevitably lead to the suppression of individual initiative and creativity, and that economic planning required a level of government control over individual life that was incompatible with individual freedom and democracy. Hayek's next famous masterpiece is his 1960 book, The Constitution of Liberty. In this book, he argued that the rule of law is essential for a free and prosperous society. Hayek also argued that the law should be focused on protecting individual rights rather than promoting specific social or economic goals. He believed that the government's role should be limited to enforcing the rule of law and protecting individual rights, and that attempts to use the law to achieve specific social or economic outcomes would inevitably lead to government abuses of power and the loss of individual freedom. Friedrich Hayek argued that the law develops organically over time, rather than being the product of deliberate planning or design. He believed that the law was a result of the accumulated wisdom and experience of individuals over many generations, and that it evolved in response to changing circumstances and needs. Hayek argued that common law, which is based on precedent and case law, was the best example of a legal system that developed organically over time. He believed that the common law allowed for flexibility and adaptation to the changing circumstances, and that it provided a framework for protecting individual freedom and limiting government power.
Now we could talk about the life, philosophy, and economics of Friedrich Hayek for hours. However, since I don't want this video to be 2 hours long, it's time to talk about the second guy on this video, Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman was born in Brooklyn, New York on July 31st, 1912, to a Jewish family of immigrants from Eastern Europe. Friedman showed an early aptitude for mathematics and economics, and earned his bachelor's degree from Rutgers University in 1932, and his master's and PhD degrees from the University of Chicago in 1933 and 1946. At the University of Chicago, Friedman was exposed to the ideas of the Chicago School of Economics, which emphasized the importance of free markets and individual liberty. One of the economists he was influenced by was no other than Friedrich Hayek, who, as we learned before, generally didn't view government intervention in the economy positively. Friedman's experience during the Great Depression also had a significant impact on his intellectual development. He witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of the economic downturn and became convinced that government intervention in the economy was often misguided and ineffective. During his lifetime, Milton Friedman made many important academic contributions, and in 1976, Friedman was awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences for his contribution in the field of economics. However, what really specializes Friedman from other academic economists was how he popularized the field and his ideas to the public, writing numerous best-selling books, appearing in many TV programs, most famously his own PBS series, Free to Choose, which was broadcasted in 1980, and writing newspaper articles and columns in newspapers such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Forbes. In these books, TV appearances, documentaries, lectures, and newspaper columns, Milton Friedman heavily advocated for free market reforms, such as removing trade barriers, privatization, lowering tax burdens and regulation, and more. For example, according to Friedman, private markets were inherently more efficient and gave better results than government monopolies, because in free competitive markets, it's very hard for entrepreneurs to have profitable businesses, with almost all businesses failing or having very low profit margins. Heck, even Amazon wasn't profitable until around 2016. So entrepreneurs and businessmen have to give their best to customers, while in government-controlled industries, this incentive to attract customers and improve just doesn't exist. Not only did Milton Friedman advocate for economic freedom, he also advocated for other forms of social freedom. For example, he had a major role in ending the military draft during the Vietnam War. He supported the legalization of marijuana and ending the drug war, supported LGBT rights, and more.
By this point, you may think that Milton Friedman was just an ideological copy-paste of Friedrich Hayek. Well, Milton Friedman was indeed influenced by him. However, there is one thing in which Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek's opinion differed, and that's monetary theory.
Contrary to Friedrich Hayek, which argued that money and finance should be completely privatized, Milton Friedman did believe that central banks had a role to play in the economy. However, his views on central banking were pretty interesting, to say the least. First of all, Milton firmly believed that ideally, central banks should be run by computer programs. According to Friedman, by removing human distraction from the decision-making process, Friedman believed that central banks could avoid the political pressures that often influence monetary policy decisions. He also believed that computer programs could be designed to be more transparent and predictable, which would help businesses and customers make better decisions about their investments and spending. Milton Friedman also came out with the K% rule, which argued that central banks should increase the money supply of the economy in a rate that's close to that of GDP growth. This theory isn't widely accepted by most economists and central banks, who mostly prefer going by inflation targeting, which argues that central banks should increase interest rates whenever there is an inflation of over 3%, like what happened in 2021 and 2022, and decrease interest rates and print money whenever there is a recession, which could cause the economy to shrink, like what happened during the 2008 financial crisis, or what happened with the coronavirus lockdowns. Friedrich Hayek died in 1922 at the age of 93, and Milton Friedman died in 2006 at the age of 94. However, both of them had a tremendous effect on the world and society we live in that lasts to this day. Both Milton Friedman and Hayek helped to establish the economic ideology of neoliberalism, which is an ideology and policy model that emphasizes the value of free market and competition. During the 1980s and 1990s, due to the influence of people like Friedman and Hayek, and the failures of excessive government interventionism, many countries, ranging from Britain under Thatcher to Chile under the dictator Pinochet to the Scandinavian countries, started implementing massive neoliberal reforms. These reforms mostly, although not always, quite positive, improving the lives of up to billions of people all around the world. A good example of this is Estonia. In 1991, Estonia was a part of the failing Soviet system, with a pretty miserable GDP per capita of around 3,000. However, throughout the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it implemented massive amount of neoliberal policies, such as removing trade barriers, privatizations, and deregulation. This led Estonia's GDP to grow by, wait a second, over 800% in the past 3 decades, with an average Estonian now living over 9 years longer than the average Estonian under Soviet rule.